November 8th, 1942, North Africa. 330 hours. Lieutenant Ellen Rogers held the flashlight steady. Her hand did not shake. It could not shake. The surgeon operating in front of her needed every second of stable light, or the soldier on the table would die. The concrete floor beneath her boots was slick with blood. The smell of it mixed with sweat and fear and something else. Burned flesh. Infection already setting in. The soldier on the table was 20 years old, maybe younger. His left leg was gone below the knee. Shrapnel had torn through his chest wall. The surgeon worked without speaking. No anesthesia, no morphine. Supply ships were stuck in the harbor 2 miles away. German planes kept bombing the docks. Everything they had brought in the landing boats was already used up. The boy screamed. Ellen did not flinch. She kept the light aimed at the wound. The surgeon cut away dead tissue. Black, rotting. The boy thrashed. 2 corpsmen held him down. One of them was crying. Ellen was not. She had cried on the boat coming in. She had cried climbing down the iron ladder into the assault craft while bullets hit the water around them. She had cried when they dragged the first soldier into this abandoned school building and realized there were no beds, no tables, just concrete and blood and more wounded men than anyone had prepared them for. She was done crying. The boy passed out. Shock. The surgeon kept working. Ellen adjusted the angle of the flashlight. Her arm burned. She had been holding it for 6 hours. There were 30 more soldiers on the floor waiting. Some would not make it to the table. She could hear them. Low moans, prayers. One man kept calling for his mother. He was gut-shot. There was nothing anyone could do for him. A nurse knelt beside him anyway, holding his hand, lying, telling him he would be fine. Ellen had been a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania. 10 months ago, she had signed up for the Army Nurse Corps because her brother could not serve. Heart condition. He was ashamed. She told him she would go instead. He laughed, said the Army would never let women near combat. Ellen had believed him. She was wrong. The surgeon finished, stepped back. Blood covered his arms to the elbows. He looked at Ellen, nodded once. That was all. No words. He moved to the next man on the floor. Ellen followed with the flashlight. Behind her, corpsmen carried the amputee to a corner. He would live, probably, if infection did not kill him, if they got antibiotics before gangrene set in, if German snipers did not shoot through the windows again. A nurse named Catherine stood at the doorway with a rifle. She was not supposed to have it. Medical personnel were non-combatants under the Geneva Convention. But after the 3rd sniper round came through the window and hit a patient in the head, Catherine took a rifle from a dead soldier outside. She stood watch, daring anyone to fire again. The medical officers did not stop her. They needed her more than they needed rules. Ellen thought about the recruitment posters she had seen. Women in clean uniforms, smiling, serving coffee, typing reports. The posters said 1 woman in service freed 1 man for combat. The posters did not say anything about holding flashlights during amputations while the patient screamed because there was no morphine. They did not mention the smell. They did not mention watching men die on concrete floors because there were not enough doctors or supplies or time. The next soldier had a chest wound, sucking, air bubbling through blood. The surgeon worked fast. Ellen held the light. Her arm shook now. She could not stop it. The surgeon did not complain. He just worked, cut, stitched, moved on. There was no time for precision, no time for anything except keeping men alive long enough to evacuate them to a real hospital, if they ever got access to one. 6 months earlier, Ellen had been standing in line at a recruiting station in Philadelphia. The line stretched 2 blocks. Young men pushing forward, loud, excited, talking about killing Germans, talking about medals. Behind them were women, quieter, more serious. Ellen had waited 4 hours. When she reached the desk, the recruiter looked at her like she was lost. "This is the men's line, ma'am. Women's auxiliary is next door." Ellen had gone next door, signed papers, raised her right hand, promised to serve. They told her she would be a typist, maybe a switchboard operator, something safe, something appropriate for a woman. Then the casualties started coming in. North Africa, Sicily, Italy. There were not enough nurses, not enough doctors, not enough anyone. The safe assignments disappeared. Ellen and 60 other nurses climbed into assault boats and hit the beach at Erasure under sniper fire, because the men bleeding out in the sand did not care whether the hands holding them belonged to men or women. The surgeon moved to another patient. This one was unconscious, shrapnel in the abdomen. The surgeon opened him up. Intestines spilled out, perforated in 8 places. The surgeon looked at Ellen, shook his head. Nothing we can do. Ellen kept the light steady anyway while the surgeon sewed the man closed, gave him a chance. Maybe. The man would die. They both knew it. But the surgeon tried anyway. A corpsman came in, more wounded outside. 12 men. One of the trucks hit a mine. The surgeon did not look up. Put them on the floor. We will get to them. The corpsman hesitated. Sir, 3 of them are German prisoners. The surgeon stopped, looked at the corpsman, then put them on the floor with the others. The corpsman left. Ellen heard him outside, shouting orders, dragging men inside. Catherine was still at the door with the rifle. She watched the German soldiers come in, watched corpsmen lay them on the floor next to American soldiers. One of the Germans was awake, young, terrified. He said something in German. Catherine did not lower the rifle. An American soldier on the floor next to him turned his head, told the German to shut up. The German did. Ellen had been taught that Germans were the enemy, evil, monsters who started the war. But the boy on the floor looked like her students back in Pennsylvania. 16, maybe 17, bleeding from a leg wound, crying quietly. She wondered if his mother knew where he was. She wondered if he had a sister who promised to serve in his place. The surgeon moved to the German boy. Ellen followed with the flashlight. The boy flinched when he saw them, thought they were going to kill him. The surgeon ignored his fear, just started working, cut away the torn uniform, exposed the wound. Shrapnel. Deep. The boy screamed. The surgeon kept going. No morphine for him either. Ellen held the light steady. 36 hours. That was how long Ellen stood in that building holding the flashlight. 36 hours without sleep, without food, without a break. The surgeon worked the entire time. So did Catherine at the door. So did every nurse and corpsman in that blood-soaked room. When the supply ships finally unloaded and morphine arrived, Ellen cried again. Not for herself, for the men who had suffered without it. Later, the medical officers would write reports. They would say the nurses performed admirably under fire. They would recommend commendations. They would tell headquarters that the nurses had proven themselves capable of serving in combat zones. But that night, covered in blood and exhausted, Ellen did not think about reports or commendations. She thought about the boys who died on the floor. She thought about the ones who lived because she held a flashlight steady. She thought about the posters back home, the clean uniforms, the smiling women. She thought about how none of it was true. July 20th, 1942. 4 months earlier, Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Private Mary Heaney stepped off the train into chaos. 400 women, white, black, all of them strangers. All of them wearing civilian clothes that would be taken away by evening. They were herded into lines, separated, white women to the left, black women to the right. Mary watched the separation happen, watched women who had been sitting together on the train get divided by skin color. Nobody explained why. Nobody had to. Everyone already knew. Mary was white, 23 years old, a secretary from Ohio. She had a brother named Joe. Joe had a heart condition. The draft board rejected him. Joe cried. Mary watched her brother cry and decided she would serve instead. When she told him, he laughed. Said the same thing Ellen's brother said. The army does not want women. Mary proved him wrong. The barracks were segregated. Separate buildings, separate mess halls, separate everything. Mary unpacked her bag in a room with 15 other white women. Through the window, she could see the black women's barracks. Same building design, same size, same distance from the training field, but separate, always separate. The training started the next morning. 5 a.m., a whistle, women stumbling out of bunks, pulling on uniforms that did not fit, running to formation in the dark. A drill sergeant stood in front of them. Male, 40 years old, face like stone. He looked at the women like they were a mistake, like someone had made an error sending them here. He did not introduce himself. He just started yelling, "You are not soldiers. You will never be soldiers. You are here to free men for combat. That is your only purpose. You will type. You will answer phones. You will cook and clean and do laundry. And when this war is over, you will go home and forget you ever wore a uniform." The sergeant walked down the line, stopped in front of a woman who was crying. "What is your name?" The woman could not answer. The sergeant moved on. Pathetic. Mary did not cry. She stood straight, eyes forward. She had grown up with 3 brothers. She knew how men tested you, how they pushed to see if you would break. She would not break. The physical training was brutal. Running, push-ups, obstacle courses. The women wore skirts. There were no pants. The army had not designed uniforms for women doing physical labor. The skirts caught on barbed wire, ripped. Women fell, got up, kept going. Some did not make it, collapsed, were carried to the infirmary, never came back. Mary learned to march, learned to salute, learned to strip and clean a rifle, even though she would never carry one. Learned radio codes, Morse code, how to operate a switchboard, how to type 90 words per minute without errors. She learned all of it, while male soldiers walked past the training field and laughed, called them petticoat soldiers, called them worse. The drill sergeant did nothing to stop it. At night, Mary lay in her bunk and listened to women cry, homesick, exhausted, humiliated. Some talked about quitting, about going home. Mary did not talk. She thought about Joe, about how ashamed he was that he could not serve, about how he would feel if she quit. She did not quit. The black women trained separately. Mary did not speak to any of them for 3 weeks, not because she did not want to, because the army forbade it. Separate training, separate barracks, separate schedules. The only time Mary saw them was at morning formation, standing in their own lines, silent, watching. One night, a fight broke out in the white women's barracks. 2 women, one from Alabama, one from New York. The Alabama woman said something about black women not belonging in uniform. The New York woman hit her. Hard, blood everywhere. The drill sergeant came in, separated them, punished both. Extra duty, kitchen detail for a week. The Alabama woman complained, said she was only speaking the truth. The sergeant did not care about truth. He cared about order, and fighting disrupted order. Mary watched the black women from a distance. They worked harder than anyone, ran faster, scored higher on tests. It did not matter. They still ate in separate mess halls, still slept in separate buildings, still got assigned to menial jobs after graduation. Cooks, cleaners, laundry, jobs that did not require training, jobs that wasted their skills. In November 1942, protests forced the army to integrate the dining halls. Mary sat at a table with 3 other white women. A black woman sat down next to her. The table went silent. The white women stared. The black woman ignored them, started eating. Mary looked at her, said hello. The black woman looked back, surprised, suspicious. Then she nodded. Hello. That was all. But it was enough. 6 weeks later, Mary graduated. She was assigned to a communications unit in England. The black woman she had said hello to was assigned to a laundry unit in Georgia. Same training, same test scores, different assignments, different futures. Mary did not understand it, did not agree with it, but she could not change it. She just got on the train, went where they told her to go, did what they told her to do. February 7th, 1944. Anzio, Italy. Lieutenant Blanche Sigmund did not hear the bomb coming. Nobody did. The Luftwaffe pilot was running, a British fighter on his tail. Gunfire. The pilot panicked, dumped his bomb load. 5 bombs. Anti-personnel. They fell on the 95th Evacuation Hospital, fell on the tents marked with red crosses, fell on the nurses and doctors and patients who thought red crosses meant protection. Blanche was inside a tent, changing a dressing on a soldier who had lost both legs. The soldier was talking, telling her about his girlfriend back home, how he was going to marry her when the war ended, how they were going to have kids, live in a small house in Kansas. Normal things, safe things. Blanche smiled, told him it sounded perfect. The first bomb hit 50 yards away. The explosion shook the tent, knocked over medical equipment. The soldier stopped talking, looked at Blanche. What was that? She did not answer. She was already moving, grabbing supplies, preparing for casualties. There would be casualties. There were always casualties. The second bomb hit closer, 30 yards. The tent walls rippled. Dirt and debris flew through the air. Someone outside screamed. Blanche ran for the exit. The soldier with no legs called after her. "Lieutenant, wait." She did not wait. There were wounded outside. That was her job. Help the wounded. The third bomb hit the tent. Direct hit. Shrapnel tore through canvas, through metal, through flesh. Blanche was halfway to the exit. The explosion caught her from behind, threw her forward. She hit the ground, could not breathe, could not move. She tried to get up, could not. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Another nurse ran into the tent, saw Blanche on the ground, screamed her name. Blanche tried to answer. No sound came out. The other nurse knelt beside her, checked for wounds, found them, too many, blood everywhere. The nurse pressed her hands against Blanche's back, trying to stop the bleeding. It did not stop. Blanche thought about home, Ohio, small town, her mother, her father, her little brother who enlisted after she did. She had written him a letter last week, told him to stay safe, told him the war was almost over, told him she would see him soon. She had lied. She would not see him soon. The other nurse was crying, begging Blanche to stay awake. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Blanche tried. She wanted to stay. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see her brother. She wanted to live. But wanting was not enough. She died on the floor of the tent, surrounded by the patients she had been trying to save. 28 people died in that bombing. 22 of them were hospital personnel, doctors, nurses, corpsmen, people who had volunteered to save lives, people who wore red crosses, people who thought they were protected. The soldier with no legs survived. He was evacuated 2 days later. He wrote a letter to Blanche's parents, told them their daughter was a hero, told them she had smiled at him minutes before she died, told them she had made him believe he could have a normal life. He did not tell them how she died. He did not tell them about the blood. He did not tell them she had been running toward the wounded when the bomb hit. Some things parents do not need to know. They buried Blanche on the Anzio beachhead, temporary grave, next to the soldiers she had tried to save. 4 years later, they dug her up, sent her home, buried her in Ohio, in a small cemetery, next to people who had never heard a bomb explode, next to people who had never held a flashlight during an amputation, next to people who died in their sleep, peacefully. Blanche Sigmund was 26 years old. She had enlisted because she wanted to help. She had trained at Fort Des Moines. She had worked in field hospitals in North Africa, in Sicily, in Italy. She had seen men die. She had saved men who should have died. She had done everything the army asked her to do. And then a German pilot who was running from a British fighter dropped his bombs on a hospital marked with red crosses. And Blanche Sigmund became one of more than 400 American women who died in service during World War II. The recruitment posters never mentioned that. They never mentioned Lieutenant Alida Lutz, flight nurse, 196th mission. Her plane went down. First American military woman to die in a combat zone. They never mentioned Lieutenant Francis Slanger, killed by German artillery, October 21st, 1944. They never mentioned the 6 nurses who died when a Japanese suicide plane hit the USS Comfort, or the 5 medical officers, or the 8 enlisted men, or the 7 patients who burned to death when the ship caught fire. The posters showed women in clean uniforms, smiling, serving coffee, typing reports, safe. The posters were lies, and the women who enlisted knowing they were lies did it anyway. Because someone had to, because their brothers could not, because men were dying faster than the draft could replace them, because when you are standing in line at a recruiting station and the sergeant tells you to go home, that women do not belong in uniform, you have 2 choices. You can leave, or you can prove him wrong. More than 350,000 American women chose to prove him wrong. They served in every theater, Europe, Pacific, North Africa. They worked as nurses, pilots, mechanics, cryptographers, switchboard operators, postal workers. They lived in tents, in bombed buildings, in barracks with no heat. They ate rations. They worked 12-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts, 36-hour shifts. They held flashlights during amputations. They flew planes across oceans. They decoded messages that saved lives. They sorted mail so soldiers would know their families had not forgotten them. And they did it while being told they were not real soldiers, while being called petticoat soldiers and whores and worse, while being segregated by race, while being assigned to menial jobs despite their qualifications, while being excluded from veteran benefits, while being forgotten by history books that only remembered the men. The women who stepped off trains at Fort Des Moines in July 1942 did not know what was coming. They did not know about the blood, the bombs, the bodies. They did not know about Ellen Rogers holding a flashlight for 36 hours, or Blanche Sigmund dying on a tent floor, or the thousands of women who would come after them, who would serve, who would sacrifice, who would prove that women could stand in uniform next to men and fight the same war for the same cause. They only knew they wanted to serve, and that was enough. September 23rd, 1944. Occupied France, 20 kilometers behind German lines. Virginia Hall pressed her face into the mud. 4 hours in this ditch, watching the farmhouse across the field, waiting. Inside, German officers were singing, drunk, careless. They felt safe this far behind the lines. The wind shifted. She could smell cigarette smoke drifting from the open window. Her prosthetic leg ached. Cuthbert, that was what she called it. The wooden leg she had worn since a hunting accident in Turkey took her real one. Every hour lying still made the stump roar. But Virginia had learned to ignore pain. Pain meant you were alive, still moving, still dangerous. She pulled the camera from her jacket. German-made. Leica. She had taken it off a dead officer in Sicily. The irony never failed, using their equipment against them. She aimed through the window. The officers had left maps spread across the table, unit positions, supply routes, defensive coordinates, everything the Allies needed. She clicked the shutter, 3 times, nearly silent, but in the stillness of the field, each click felt like a gunshot to her ears. One officer stood up, walked toward the window. Virginia stopped breathing. He was 3 feet away. She could see his face clearly now. Young, clean-shaven, wedding ring on his left hand. If he looked down, if he turned on a lamp, if he decided to step outside for air, she was dead. She had a pistol, Colt .38, 6 rounds, but 3 officers inside, maybe more in the next room. She would not make it 10 feet. The officer stared into the darkness, directly at her position. Virginia did not move, did not blink. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about the pistol, about whether she could draw it fast enough, about whether dying here in a French ditch was better than what the Gestapo would do if they took her alive. He turned away, closed the window, latched it, walked back to the table. Virginia exhaled slowly through her nose. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the mud until they stopped. This was the part civilians never understood. The terror. The absolute certainty that every mission would be your last. That every checkpoint was the one where someone would recognize you. That every safe house would be the one the Gestapo raided 10 minutes after you arrived. Fear was constant. You just learned to work through it. She waited 10 more minutes, making sure they settled back in. Then she crawled backward out of the ditch, inch by inch. No sudden movements. Cuthbert caught on roots, twisted. The stump screamed. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood. Kept moving. When she finally reached the tree line, she stood. Her leg buckled immediately. She caught herself against a trunk, waited for the worst of the pain to pass. It never really passed. She just started walking anyway. 14 kilometers to the safe house. She would walk all night, develop the film in the morning, radio the intelligence to London by afternoon. By tomorrow evening, Allied bombers would destroy those supply dumps. The German officers would die in the raid. They would never know it was the woman in the ditch who killed them. That was how it worked. Invisible. Inevitable. November 7th, 1942, 2 years earlier. Lyon, France. Virginia sat in the back room of a bookshop on Rue de la République. The owner, Pierre, stood at the door watching the street through a gap in the curtains. His hands were shaking. Pierre had been reliable for 6 months, helped her move agents through the city, stored supplies in his basement, never asked uncomfortable questions. But tonight, something was wrong. She could see it in the way he kept glancing at her, the way he would not quite meet her eyes. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. A man entered through the back door. Tall, thin, early 40s, expensive coat, too expensive for someone in the resistance. He smiled when he saw her. "I am Marcel. I work with the network in Erasure. I have information about a German supply depot." Virginia studied him, his eyes, his hands, the way he stood. Something was off. She could not identify what, just instinct, the kind that had kept her alive this long. "Tell me about it." 20 kilometers south of the city, near the rail depot, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, lightly guarded. His French was correct, but the accent was wrong. Not Lyon, not even southern France. Northern, maybe Belgian, maybe something else. Perfect target for sabotage. "How did you learn about this depot?" Marcel hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Too long. "A friend who works there. German conscript. Check. He wants to help us." Virginia nodded slowly. "When can we see it?" "Tomorrow night. I will take you there personally. We can scout the location together." Marcel was still smiling, but his eyes were not smiling. They were watching her, measuring her response. "That sounds perfect," Virginia said. She stood, extended her hand. "Thank you for bringing this to us. We need more people like you." Marcel shook her hand. His palm was dry, too dry. People in the resistance sweated when they delivered intelligence. They were nervous, afraid. This man was calm, confident. He left through the back door. Virginia waited until his footsteps faded. Then she turned to Pierre. "He is Gestapo." Pierre went pale, stepped away from the door. "How can you possibly know that? The accent is wrong. The story is too clean. And no one in the resistance would bring actionable intelligence directly to me. They would go through channels, through people they trust. This man walked in off the street and offered me a perfect target. That is exactly how they work. They set traps and wait for us to walk into them. What are you going to do?" Pierre was sweating now, his voice shaking. Virginia was already packing papers into her shoulder bag. "I am leaving Lyon tonight. Right now. You should do the same. They know about this shop. They followed Marcel here. That is the entire point." Pierre shook his head. "I cannot. My family. The business." If I run, they will know. Virginia looked at him for a long moment. They both knew what happened to people who stayed. Arrest within a week, torture in the basement cells, execution against a warehouse wall. But Pierre had a wife, 3 children. He could not just disappear into the night. "Be careful," was all she said. Then she left through the back door, walked 3 blocks at a normal pace. Then she started running. She reached her apartment in 8 minutes, grabbed the emergency bag she kept packed under the bed, burned her codebooks in the kitchen sink, smashed her radio with a hammer, destroyed the crystals, threw the pieces into 3 different storm drains on her way to the train station. By the time the Gestapo kicked in her door tomorrow morning, there would be nothing left except ash and questions. The Gare de Perrache was crowded, workers heading home, soldiers on leave. Virginia bought a ticket to Perpignan at the southern window. The clerk barely glanced at her. She walked toward the platform. German soldiers stood near the entrance, checking papers, studying faces. Virginia's heart rate increased. Her forged identification was excellent. She had used it 24 times. But Klaus Barbie had flooded Lyon with 500 Gestapo agents in the past month. They were checking everyone, arresting anyone remotely suspicious. The entire city had become a closing trap. "Your papers, mademoiselle." The soldier was young, maybe 20, bored expression. Virginia handed him the documents, smiled. "Not too much, just enough." "Where are you traveling?" "To Perpignan. My sister just had a baby, first grandchild in the family." The soldier looked at her face, looked at the photograph on the papers, looked back at her face. Virginia kept smiling, kept her breathing steady. The platform was 20 meters away. If he called for backup, she could run, probably make it to the street, probably disappear into the old quarter before they organized a search. Probably. The soldier handed back her papers. "Congratulations to your family, mademoiselle." Virginia thanked him, walked through the checkpoint, did not look back, did not rush, just walked onto the train and found a seat by the window. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, stared at the platform. She would not relax, not until the train was moving, not until Lyon disappeared behind her. The train pulled out 15 minutes later. Virginia watched the city fade into darkness. She thought about Pierre, about the agents she was leaving behind, about the networks she had built over 18 months. Radio operators, safe houses, couriers, forgers. All of it compromised now. All of it collapsing because one man had walked into a bookshop with the wrong accent and a story that sounded too perfect. She thought about Marcel, wondered if that was even his real name, wondered how many people he had already betrayed. The Gestapo paid well for informants. 50,000 Reichsmarks for information leading to her capture. Enough money to buy a house, start a new life. Enough to make almost anyone a traitor. Marcel would collect his payment tomorrow. Probably celebrate. He would never think about the people he sent to the torture chambers. If Virginia ever saw him again, she decided, she would kill him. No conversation, no explanations, just a bullet, quick and clean. The train reached Perpignan at dawn, cold, grey, rain falling. Virginia got off, found the café on Rue de la Loge where the guide was supposed to wait. A shepherd named Antoine, 60 years old, face like leather. He smuggled people over the Pyrenees for money. No politics, no ideology, just business. He looked at Cuthbert when she sat down, shook his head. "You cannot make it. The mountains this time of year. 7,000 feet. Snow. Ice. You will die." Virginia put money on the table. 500 francs. Twice the normal rate. "I will make it." Antoine looked at the money, looked at her, shrugged, picked up the bills. "Your funeral. We leave in 1 hour." They left the city on foot, walked into the foothills. The trail rose steeply, almost immediately. Virginia's legs screamed with every step. Cuthbert was not designed for mountain climbing. The wooden joint locked up, dug into the stump, ground against raw flesh. Within an hour she was bleeding. Within 2 hours, blood soaked through her sock, filled her boot, left a trail of red drops on the rocks behind her. Antoine looked back once, saw the blood, said nothing, just kept walking. Night fell. The temperature dropped below freezing. Snow began falling, heavy, wet. The trail disappeared under white. Virginia followed Antoine's footprints. One step, then another, then another. Cuthbert cracked, a stress fracture in the wooden shaft. Every step now felt like knives. The stump was hamburger, raw meat grinding against splintered wood. Virginia thought about stopping, about sitting down in the snow, about letting the cold take her. It would be easy, painless after the first few minutes. No more running, no more fear, no more pain. But then she thought about Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, sitting in his comfortable office, drinking real coffee, reading reports, signing execution orders. 7,500 people sent to concentration camps, 4,000 executed in basements and back alleys. He was still there, still hunting her, still winning. If she died on this mountain, he won. And Virginia Hall had not survived this long by losing. She kept walking, put one foot in front of the other, breathed, moved, survived. That was all there was now. Movement. The rest was just pain, and pain could be ignored. They crossed into Spain at dawn on the second day, 50 miles in 48 hours. Antoine turned around, saw Virginia still standing behind him. His eyes went wide. "You actually made it. I thought you died 10 kilometers back." Virginia tried to answer. Her legs folded. She collapsed face first into the snow. A Spanish farmer found them, carried Virginia to his farmhouse. His wife took one look at her leg, started crying, called for the village doctor. The doctor arrived, cut away Virginia's boot, her sock. The stump underneath was black, infected, pus and blood. The doctor looked up at her. "This is gangrenous. I need to amputate. Take more of the leg." Virginia shook her head. "No, you will die of infection." "No." The doctor did what he could, cleaned the wound, bandaged it, gave her morphine, told her she was insane. She probably was. 3 days of fever, hallucinations. She saw German soldiers standing over her bed, saw Klaus Barbie smiling, telling her she had lost, that everyone she tried to save was already dead. She tried to fight, tried to reach for a gun that was not there. The farmer's wife held her down, whispered that she was safe. Virginia did not believe her. There was no such thing as safe. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Virginia woke clear-headed, alive. She asked for a telephone. The farmer said the nearest one was 10 kilometers away in town. Virginia tried to stand, could not. Her leg would not support any weight. The farmer brought crutches. Virginia took them, started walking. The farmer followed her, shaking his head, muttering in Spanish about crazy Americans. 10 kilometers took 4 hours. Each step on the crutches felt like grinding glass into the stump. Virginia kept walking. She called the British Embassy in Madrid, identified herself, gave her code name. They sent a car immediately, picked her up, drove her to Madrid, put her in a hospital bed. A real doctor examined her leg, said she was lucky to be alive, said most people would have died on that mountain. Virginia said she was not most people. The doctor could not argue with that. The British debriefed her for 3 days. Then they told her she was done, finished. The Gestapo knew her face. Klaus Barbie had personally put a 50,000 Reichsmark bounty on her head. Every collaborator in France was looking for her. Every checkpoint had her description. If she went back, she would be captured within days, tortured, executed. The smart thing was to stay in England, train new agents, work from behind a desk where it was safe. Virginia said no. She was going back. The British officer in charge looked at her like she was insane. "That is suicide." "Maybe. But I am still going. We cannot send you. We will not be responsible for your death." "I understand." Virginia stood up, walked out of the office, went to the Americans. The Office of Strategic Services was new, desperate for experienced operatives. Virginia walked into their London headquarters, told them who she was, what she had done. The OSS officers could barely believe it. The woman who escaped Lyon, the woman Klaus Barbie called the most dangerous Allied spy in France. She was standing in their office asking for a job. Why do you want to go back? Because someone has to. The resistance networks are collapsing. The Allies need intelligence for the invasion. And because Klaus Barbie is still there, still torturing, still killing, and I want to be the one who stops him. The OSS officers looked at each other, nodded. You start training Monday. They gave her a new identity, new papers, new cover story. They taught her how to disguise Cuthbert, how to walk without the limp, how to change her appearance so completely that even people who knew her would not recognize her. Virginia learned it all, practiced until perfect. In March 1944, they parachuted her back into France. The landing was rough. She hit the ground hard. Cuthbert cracked again. Virginia ignored it, buried her parachute, changed into civilian clothes, started walking east. Barbie had no idea she was back. That was exactly how she wanted it. Over the next 4 months, Virginia organized resistance networks across the Haute-Loire region. She recruited farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, factory workers, people the Germans dismissed as unimportant. She trained them in sabotage, how to derail trains, how to cut telephone lines, how to ambush supply convoys without getting caught. She armed them with weapons dropped by British planes, organized them into cells that could not betray each other even under torture. Some of the men did not want to take orders from a woman. Virginia was blunt with them. I control the money. I control the weapons. You want to fight the Germans? You work with me. If not, you can sit home and wait for liberation. Most of them cooperated after that. She disguised herself as an old peasant woman, sold cheese in village markets. Cheese she made herself from goat milk. German soldiers bought it, never suspected. They saw an old woman with a limp, not the most wanted spy in France. She gathered intelligence while selling cheese, listened to soldiers talk, noted unit movements, mapped defensive positions, then radioed everything to London at night. When the Allies invaded Normandy in June 1944, Virginia's networks activated. They destroyed rail lines across the region, cut every major telephone cable, ambushed German convoys trying to move north to the beaches, killed hundreds of soldiers, delayed reinforcements by days, possibly weeks. The Germans retaliated viciously, burned entire villages, executed civilians, hunted resistance fighters through the forests with dogs. Virginia kept organizing, kept training, kept fighting. By August, American troops were advancing through France. Virginia met them at the outskirts of Le Puy, showed her OSS credentials to the commanding officer, a colonel from Pennsylvania. He stared at her, at Cuthbert, at the mud-stained peasant dress. You are Artemis. Virginia nodded. The colonel shook his head slowly. We heard about you, about the woman who walked over the Pyrenees, about the networks you built, about how Barbie never caught you. He paused. The stories do not do you justice. Virginia did not stay for celebrations. She packed her small bag, got on a jeep heading east. The war was not over yet. Germany had not surrendered. There was still work to do. After the war ended, Virginia Hall received the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive it during World War II. General William Donovan pinned it on her chest in a private ceremony. No press, no cameras, no publicity. Virginia insisted. She did not want attention, did not want her photograph in newspapers where people she had worked with might be identified. The work had been classified. It would stay classified. She joined the CIA when it formed in 1947, worked in operations until 1966, retired at 60 years old, 25 years as an intelligence officer, most of it spent in complete anonymity. She never told her story, never wrote a book, never gave interviews. When historians came asking questions, she politely declined, said there was nothing interesting to tell, said other people sacrificed more. The historians did not believe her. but they could not force her to talk. Klaus Barbie fled Lyon in August 1944, escaped to South America with help from American intelligence. He lived freely in Bolivia for 40 years, working, raising a family, never facing justice. France finally extradited him in 1983, put him on trial for crimes against humanity. He showed no remorse, smirked through the proceedings, was convicted, died in prison in 1991, 77 years old, comfortable to the end. Virginia Hall lived to see his trial. She was 75, retired, living quietly in Maryland. She watched the news coverage on television, saw Klaus Barbie sitting in court, saw him show no remorse for the thousands he murdered. She thought about all the times she had been within meters of him in Lyon, how one wrong step would have meant the basement, the torture rooms, the wall. She had beaten him, outlived him. That was enough. She died in 1982 at age 76. Quiet, largely forgotten except by the people who knew what she had done, the women who served with her, the men whose lives she saved, the resistance fighters she trained. They remembered. They told their children and grandchildren, kept the stories alive when history tried to bury them. Virginia Hall walked over mountains on a broken prosthetic leg, parachuted into occupied France, organized resistance networks that saved thousands of lives. She did it all while the Gestapo called her the most dangerous woman in France. They were right, and they never caught her. One woman against the entire German secret police. The woman won August 6, 1945, 5:29 a.m., Los Alamos, New Mexico. Chien-Shiung Wu stood on a hill in the dark, waiting. 15 seconds, that was all. 15 seconds until the world learned what she had built, what she had calculated, what she had made possible. The bomb. She was 33 years old, Chinese-born, American by choice. One of the only women physicists working on the Manhattan Project with actual authority. Not a secretary, not an assistant, a senior scientist. Her work on gaseous diffusion had made large-scale uranium enrichment possible. The process that separated U-235 from U-238. The process that turned theory into this moment. Her equations, her experiments, her solutions to problems no one else could solve. The flash came first, brighter than anything she had ever seen. She closed her eyes, could still see it through her eyelids. White, burning. Then the sound, a roar that shook the ground beneath her feet, rolled across the desert like thunder that would not stop. The mushroom cloud rose, massive, impossible, real. The men around her were cheering, shouting, congratulating each other, slapping backs. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer stood silent, staring at the cloud. Chien-Shiung knew what he was thinking. They had succeeded, and now they had to live with it. She thought about Hiroshima, about the city that would receive this, about the people who would die because her calculations were correct, because her process worked, because she was good at physics. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, gone in seconds, because Chien-Shiung Wu understood uranium better than almost anyone alive. She thought about her husband Luke, back in New York, sleeping. He did not know where she was, did not know what she was doing, could not know. The secrecy had put distance between them. She had not been able to explain why she disappeared for weeks, why she could not discuss her work, why she came home exhausted and would not say why. He would understand soon. The whole world would understand soon. March 1944, 17 months earlier, Columbia University, New York City. Chien-Shiung sat in Dr. Harold Urey's office. Across from her sat 3 male physicists, all older, all American-born, all looking at her like she was lost. Dr. Urey cleared his throat. Dr. Wu, we appreciate your interest in the project, but this work requires extensive experience with radiation detection, advanced understanding of nuclear physics. We need someone who can handle the pressure. Chien-Shiung did not blink. I have a doctorate from Berkeley. My thesis was on uranium fission and xenon isotope production. I worked with Ernest Lawrence and Robert Oppenheimer. I know more about neutron absorption cross-sections than anyone in this room. One of the physicists leaned back, smiled. That is quite a claim. Is it? Chen Xiong opened her briefcase, pulled out her dissertation, slid it across the desk, read it. Then tell me I am not qualified. The men exchanged glances. Dr. Yuri picked up the dissertation, flipped through it. His expression changed. Where did you learn this? Berkeley. I defended 2 years ago. Oppenheimer was on my committee. He told me I knew everything there was to know about neutron behavior. The physicist who had smiled stopped smiling. Why are you at Smith College if you are this qualified? Because research positions are difficult to find. Chen Xiong kept her voice level. Because most universities will not hire a woman for laboratory work. Because hiring committees see my face and decide I belong in a classroom teaching undergraduates, not running experiments. So I teach. And I wait. And now you need someone who understands uranium isotope separation. And here I am. Dr. Yuri closed the dissertation, looked at the other men, looked back at Chen Xiong. Can you start Monday? Yes. You will be working on gaseous diffusion, making the separation process practical at scale. We have theoretical models. We need someone to solve the engineering problems. Can you do that? I can do that. The other physicist spoke up. Dr. Wu, you understand this is classified. You cannot tell anyone what you are working on. Not your husband, not your family, no one. I understand. Good. Welcome to the Manhattan Project. Chen Xiong walked out of that office knowing she had just joined the most important scientific project in human history. Knowing she would help build a weapon that could end the war. Knowing she had no choice. Because if Nazi Germany developed the bomb first, if the Axis had nuclear weapons and the Allies did not, how many more would die? How much longer would the war last? There were no good choices, only less terrible ones. She thought about her parents in China, about the Japanese occupation, about the reports of massacres, Nanjing, Shanghai, entire cities destroyed, hundreds of thousands dead. If this bomb could end the war faster, could save lives by ending it sooner, was that not worth the cost? She wanted to believe it was, had to believe it, because the alternative was admitting she was building a weapon that would kill thousands for no reason. That night she told Luke she had a new position. At Columbia. He asked doing what? She said she could not discuss it. Classified war work. He asked when she would be home. She said she did not know. Sometimes days, sometimes weeks. He looked at her, asked if she was all right. She said yes. He did not believe her. She kissed him, left before he could ask more questions. September 1944. 6 months into the project. Chen Xiong stood in front of a chalkboard covered with equations. Behind her sat 15 male physicists, all older, all skeptical. She pointed to the diffusion cascade diagram. The problem is efficiency. Natural uranium is 99.3% U-238, only 0.7% U-235. We need to concentrate the U-235 to at least 90%. That requires thousands of separation stages. One physicist raised his hand. Dr. Wu, we have been working on this for a year. The gaseous diffusion barriers keep failing. The process is too slow. We need a different approach. No. Chen Xiong turned back to the board. Started writing new equations. You need better barriers. The pores are too large. U-238 molecules are passing through at nearly the same rate as U-235. You are barely getting any separation per stage, so make the pores smaller. We tried. The barriers clog, the gas pressure drops, the whole system fails. Then do not make them smaller. Make them more uniform. Control the pore size distribution. Even if individual pores are the same size, if the distribution is tight, you get better separation. The physicist who asked the question stood up. That is impossible. We do not have the manufacturing capability. Then develop it. Chen Xiong spent the next 3 months working with engineers at the K-25 plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She redesigned the barrier manufacturing process, tested hundreds of materials, nickel, aluminum oxide, ceramic compounds, found one that worked, built prototypes, tested them. They worked. The diffusion cascade became practical. The Oak Ridge facility went into operation, started producing enriched uranium. Nobody thanked her. The male physicists who had doubted her took credit for solving the problem, published papers after the war without mentioning her contributions. Qian Xiong said nothing. She had work to do. December 1944. Hanford, Washington. The B reactor had shut down. 9 hours after reaching criticality, it just stopped. The chain reaction died. Nobody knew why. Enrico Fermi was baffled. The reactor should have worked. The calculations were correct. The design was sound. Something was wrong. Something none of them had anticipated. Qian Xiong received the call at Columbia. They needed her at Hanford immediately. She took a train, 3 days across the country, arrived at the facility exhausted, walked into a conference room full of panicked physicists and engineers. "The reactor is poisoned," Fermi said. "Something is absorbing neutrons, killing the chain reaction. We need to identify it, fast. If we cannot get this reactor operational, the plutonium production schedule is destroyed. What isotopes are present in the fuel?" Qian Xiong was already thinking, already running calculations in her head. Fermi rattled off a list. Uranium, fission products, xenon, iodine. "Stop." Qian Xiong walked to the chalkboard. "Xenon. What isotope?" "Xenon 135, probably." "Why?" "Because I wrote my dissertation on xenon isotope production from uranium fission. Xenon 135 has an enormous neutron absorption cross-section. If it builds up in the reactor core, it will kill the chain reaction. How do we fix it?" Fermi was staring at her. "You cannot remove it. It is a gas mixed with the fuel. So what do we do?" "You wait. Xenon 135 has a half-life of about 9 hours. It decays to cesium-135. The neutron absorption drops. The reactor can restart. Or you increase the fuel load, add more uranium, produce more neutrons than the xenon can absorb, overwhelm the poison." They did both. Waited for the xenon to decay, increased the fuel. The reactor restarted, stayed critical, began producing plutonium. The Manhattan Project was back on schedule. Qian Xiong went back to Columbia. Nobody mentioned her name in the official reports. Fermi received credit for solving the xenon poisoning problem. Qian Xiong went back to work. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. Qian Xiong was in her lab when the news arrived. The bomb had been dropped. Hiroshima destroyed. Early estimates, 70,000 dead, maybe more. The war would be over soon. Japan would surrender. The Manhattan Project had succeeded. She sat at her desk, stared at the report. 70,000. She thought about the calculations she had done, the diffusion barriers she designed, the uranium enrichment she made possible. Her work was in that bomb, her physics, her contribution. 70,000 people were dead because Qian Xiong Wu was good at her job. That night, she could not sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Luke asked if she was all right. She said yes. He put his arm around her, asked again. She started crying, could not stop, could not explain. He held her, did not ask questions, just held her. 3 days later, Nagasaki, another bomb, another 40,000 dead. Japan surrendered. The war was over. The Manhattan Project scientists celebrated. Qian Xiong did not celebrate. She thought about the children, the families, the people who woke up that morning in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, having no idea they had hours left to live. Years later, in 1962, she told the president of Taiwan never to build nuclear weapons, told him the cost was too high, told him some knowledge was better left unused. But she never publicly regretted her work on the Manhattan Project, never apologized, because she still believed, had to believe, that the alternative would have been worse. 12 years after the war. Qian Xiong Wu stood in her lab at Columbia. 2 male physicists, Tsung-Dao Lee and Chen-Ning Yang sat across from her. They had a theory. The law of conservation of parity might not hold for weak nuclear interactions. Physical systems and their mirror images might not behave identically. It violated everything physics had assumed for decades. They needed an experiment to prove it. They needed Chen Xiong. Why me? Because you are the best experimental physicist in the country, maybe the world. Yang was not flattering her. He was stating fact. Nobody else can design this experiment. Nobody else has your precision. Will you do it? Chen Xiong studied their equations. The experiment would be difficult. Require cobalt-60, extreme low temperatures, sensitive magnetic field measurements, months of work, maybe a year. And if the experiment failed, if parity was conserved after all, she would have wasted time and resources on a dead theory. If the experiment succeeded, it would revolutionize physics, change fundamental understanding of the universe, rewrite textbooks. I will do it. She started working immediately, designed the apparatus, ordered equipment, spent 6 months perfecting the setup. The experiment required cooling cobalt-60 to near absolute zero, applying a strong magnetic field, measuring beta particle emission. If parity was conserved, particles would emit equally in all directions. If parity was violated, they would emit preferentially in one direction. January 1957. The results came in. Parity was violated, massively. Beta particles emitted preferentially in one direction. The mirror image did not behave the same. Li and Yang were right. Physics textbooks would have to be rewritten. Chen Xiong called Li, told him. He was ecstatic, called Yang. They celebrated, started writing papers. October 1957. The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Tsung-Dao Lee and Chen-Ning Yang for their theoretical work on parity violation. Chen Xiong Wu, who designed and conducted the experiment that proved their theory, received nothing. Not a mention, not a shared prize. Nothing. Colleagues were outraged, wrote letters, protested, said it was unjust, said Chen Xiong deserved the prize as much as Li and Yang, maybe more, because theory without experimental proof is just speculation. Chen Xiong said nothing publicly, went back to work, continued researching, continued teaching, continued proving that women could do physics as well as any man, better than most. She received other awards, the Wolf Prize in Physics in 1978, the National Medal of Science in 1975, every honor except the one that mattered. The Nobel Prize went to men who did less, discovered less, mattered less, but had one advantage Chen Xiong did not. They were men. February 16, 1997, New York City. Chen Xiong Wu died at age 84. Obituaries called her the First Lady of Physics, the Chinese Marie Curie, one of the most important experimental physicists of the 20th century. They mentioned the Manhattan Project, the parity experiment, the awards she won, the Nobel Prize she did not. Her colleagues remembered her differently, remembered the woman who solved problems nobody else could, who designed experiments with precision that bordered on art, who never complained about injustice, who just kept working, kept proving herself, over and over, for 50 years. A younger generation of physicists learned about her in textbooks, about the Wu experiment, about parity violation, about how she proved that the universe was not symmetric, that mirror images did not always behave identically, that fundamental assumptions could be wrong. They learned physics from her work. Most never learned her name. In 2021, the United States Postal Service issued a stamp honoring Chen Xiong Wu, called her an innovator, a pioneer, the First Lady of Physics. The stamp showed her face, her name, finally visible, finally recognized. 24 years after she died, Chen Xiong Wu helped build the atomic bomb, helped end World War II, revolutionized physics, trained generations of students, received every honor except the Nobel Prize, and never once complained publicly about the injustice, never demanded recognition, never stopped working. Because that was what women did. They proved themselves over and over, And history forgot them anyway, until it did not, until someone remembered, until the names were recovered, until the work was acknowledged. She stood on a hill in New Mexico and watched the bomb explode, watched the mushroom cloud rise, knew she had changed the world, for better and worse. She carried that knowledge for 52 years, carried the weight of 70,000 dead in Hiroshima, 40,000 in Nagasaki, carried it quietly, without complaint, without apology, just carried it, because someone had to, because the alternative would have been worse, because being brilliant came with costs nobody prepared you for. The bomb ended the war. Her physics made it possible. That was true. The Nobel Prize went to men who did less. That was also true. Both things could be true at once. Both things were. Chen Wu lived in that contradiction, worked in that contradiction, died in that contradiction, and changed physics anyway. April 15th, 1945. Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, Germany. Lieutenant Dorothy Still stood at the gate, staring. She had been an army nurse for 3 years, had treated wounded soldiers across North Africa, Sicily, France, had seen men with limbs blown off, faces burned beyond recognition, guts spilling onto operating tables. She thought she had seen everything war could do to human bodies. She was wrong. The smell hit her first. Death, rot, human waste, so thick she could taste it. She gagged, covered her mouth. The British officer beside her did not react. He had been here for hours, had already gone numb. There are approximately 60,000 people inside, he said. His voice was flat, mechanical. Most are dying. Typhus, typhoid, tuberculosis, starvation. We estimate 10,000 are already dead. We cannot bury them fast enough. Dorothy tried to process the numbers. 60,000. 10,000 already gone. It was incomprehensible. She looked through the gate, saw skeletal figures moving between wooden barracks, saw bodies stacked like firewood, saw things that did not look human anymore. The colonel who brought her unit here had given them a choice that morning, said he would not hold it against any nurse who did not want to go inside, said what they would see was beyond anything in their training, beyond anything in medical textbooks. Dorothy and 42 other American nurses volunteered anyway. The British officer led them inside. Dorothy followed. Each step felt wrong, like walking into hell, like crossing a line you could never uncross. The first barrack was worse than anything she imagined. Wooden bunks stacked 3 high, bodies crammed together, some alive, some dead. Impossible to tell which. The living were skeletal, skin stretched over bones, eyes sunken, hollow, empty. A woman lay on the bottom bunk, naked, covered in filth, her ribs visible through skin that looked like paper. She stared at Dorothy, did not speak, did not move, just stared. Dorothy knelt beside her, checked for a pulse. The woman's wrist was so thin Dorothy's fingers overlapped, faint, irregular. This woman was dying, would probably die tonight. There was nothing Dorothy could do to stop it. How long have they been like this? Months, some of them years. The officer's voice cracked. The Germans stopped feeding them weeks ago, just abandoned them. We are trying to get food in now, but we have to be careful. If we feed them too much too fast, their systems shut down. Either way, many will not survive. Dorothy stood up, looked around, counted at least 200 people in this barrack alone, most lying still, some moving, crawling, reaching for nothing, making sounds that were not quite human. A child sat in the corner, maybe 6 years old, naked, alone, staring at the wall. Dorothy walked over, knelt down. "Hello?" The child did not respond. Dorothy reached out, touched the child's shoulder gently. The child flinched, pulled away, curled into a ball. "She is afraid," a voice said behind Dorothy. A woman was sitting on a nearby bunk, skeletal but alive enough to speak. "She thinks you are going to hurt her. That is what they did here." The woman's accent was Polish or Russian. Dorothy could not tell. "I am a nurse. I want to help." The woman laughed, hollow, bitter. "Everyone wants to help now. Where were you 2 years ago? Where were you when they were killing us?" The question hit Dorothy like a physical blow. She had no answer, could not answer, because the woman was right. Where had she been? Treating wounded American soldiers, saving lives that mattered, while this woman starved, while children died, while the world looked away. Dorothy opened her mouth, closed it. There was nothing to say. She just knelt beside the child, did not touch her, just stayed close. Eventually the child uncurled slightly, looked at Dorothy. Dorothy pulled a chocolate bar from her pocket, broke off a small piece, held it out. The child snatched it, shoved it in her mouth, swallowed without chewing, reached for more. No, too much will make you sick. Small bites. The child did not understand, kept reaching. Dorothy gave her another piece. The child ate it, then vomited, started crying. Dorothy held her, so light, like holding air, like she weighed nothing at all. Over the next 3 days, Dorothy worked 20-hour shifts. She and the other nurses moved through the barracks, tried to identify who could be saved, provided basic care, clean water, bandages, gentle food, soup made from powdered milk and canned vegetables. Nothing solid. Starving bodies could not handle it. They injected water under the skin, hypodermolysis, because the survivors were too dehydrated to drink, because their veins had collapsed. Dorothy learned to find the spots in the shoulder where fatty tissue remained. Inject slowly. Watch for swelling. Hope it helped. She treated feet shredded from wooden shoes worn for months without socks. The skin was infected, bleeding. She cleaned them, applied ointment, wrapped them in bandages. Most of the survivors cried when she touched their feet, not from pain, from kindness, because no one had been kind in so long. The British buried the dead every morning, loaded corpses onto trucks, drove them to mass graves, hundreds at a time, no names, no markers. Dorothy watched one morning, thought about the woman on the bottom bunk. She had died that first night. Dorothy never learned her name, never learned where she was from, just that she died alone in a wooden barrack in Germany. Nearly 14,000 survivors died after liberation, their bodies too damaged, too starved, too broken. Liberation came too late. At night, Dorothy lay in her tent, could not sleep, kept hearing that woman's voice. "Where were you 2 years ago?" The question followed her. She had been doing her job, following orders. But while she was doing that, this was happening. And she had not known, or had known and not understood, or had understood and not done enough. She did not know which was worse. Dorothy tried to write a letter to her mother, tried to explain. She could not find the words. Everything sounded inadequate. She gave up, crossed it all out, wrote instead, "I am fine. The work is hard but important. I will be home soon." She did not know if that was true. May 1945. Dachau concentration camp, southern Germany. Lieutenant Pat Lynch separated the living from the dead. That sounds simple. It was not. Some of the living looked dead. Some of the dead had been living minutes ago. She checked pulses, breathing, reactions, made decisions. This one lives. This one is already gone. Pat was part of an evacuation hospital unit. They had arrived days after liberation. The hospital barracks were still full of people too sick to move, too sick to save, too sick to do anything except die slowly. She treated typhus without specific medication, just supportive care. Keep them hydrated, keep them warm, keep them alive long enough for their bodies to fight back. Most did not make it. Pat found a man whose feet were destroyed. Wooden shoes with no socks had shredded them, infected, gangrenous. She cleaned them, applied ointment, wrapped them in bandages, found him clean socks. He looked at her, touched the socks like they were gold, started crying, said something in Yiddish she did not understand, then in broken English. "Angel, You are Angel. Pat shook her head. No, I am just a nurse. The man kept crying, kept touching the socks. Pat finished wrapping his feet, moved to the next patient. She did not feel like an angel. She felt helpless. Pat worked 18-hour days, came back to her tent exhausted, could not sleep, could not stop thinking about the faces, the children who would never grow up, the mothers who died calling for children who were already gone. She thought about home, about Baltimore, about her family who had no idea what she was seeing. She could not tell them, would never tell them. How do you explain this to someone who was not there? You cannot, so you stay silent. Carry it alone. June 1945, St. Ottilian, Bavaria. Private Robert Hilliard walked into the hospital. He was a clerk, not medical personnel, but someone needed to inventory the facility. He volunteered. The main building housed German soldiers, wounded Wehrmacht, receiving care from German doctors, clean beds, medicine, food. Someone told Hilliard there were others in the back, in the storage rooms. He opened a door, stopped. 400 people, crammed into rooms meant for supplies. No beds, just concrete floors. Skeletal figures lying in their own waste. Concentration camp survivors. Jewish, liberated weeks ago, supposed to be receiving care. Instead, they were here, forgotten, left to die while German soldiers received treatment 20 feet away. Hilliard walked through the rooms, counted the living, counted the dead. His hands were shaking. An American medic sat in the corner eating a sandwich. Why are they not being treated? The medic shrugged. Orders. We treat our guys first, then the Germans, then them. If there is time. There are 400 people dying in here. Not my problem. Take it up with the commander. Hilliard did. The American commander was a captain, mid-30s. Looked annoyed when Hilliard walked in. There are 400 concentration camp survivors in the back. They are not receiving care. They are dying. The captain leaned back. We have limited resources. American soldiers are priority. Then German wounded. The survivors can wait. Wait for what? To die? If necessary. The captain's voice was cold. We are not running a charity. Those orders are killing people. Either you authorize medical care for those survivors, or I go to the press. I will tell them exactly what is happening here. The captain's face went red. That is insubordination. That is the truth. Your choice, sir. 2 hours later, resources appeared. The German soldiers were moved out. The survivors were moved in, given real beds, real care. Most still died. Too late, too damaged. But at least they died with dignity. Hilliard made that happen. A clerk. Not a doctor, not a commander, just someone who refused to look away. August 1945. The war ended. Dorothy Still returned to the United States, went home to Pennsylvania. Her family asked about the war. She said she worked in hospitals, said it was not that interesting. They stopped asking. She never told them about Bergen-Belsen, about the child, about the woman's question that still kept her awake. Where were you 2 years ago? She kept it inside, locked away. Pat Lynch went back to Baltimore, got married, had children. Her family never knew what she had seen, never knew what she carried. She never told them. In 2005, historians found her, asked about her service. She told them. First time she had spoken about it. She was 83, cried while describing the feat. The man who called her an angel. She said she was not an angel, just a nurse who did her job. Pennsylvania, hospital room. Dorothy Still lay in bed, 81 years old, terminal cancer. Her daughter sat beside her, held her hand. Mum, what did you do in the war? Dorothy closed her eyes, saw the child, the chocolate, the woman on the bottom bunk, heard the question. Where were you? She opened her eyes, looked at her daughter, smiled. I was a nurse, that is all. 2 days later, Dorothy Still died. Her obituary mentioned she was a World War II veteran, Army Nurse Corps, honorable discharge, survived by 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. It did not mention Bergen-Belsen, did not mention the 3 weeks she spent in hell, did not mention the woman whose question haunted her for 44 years. She never wanted it mentioned, never wanted to remember, but she never forgot. The nurses who liberated the camps saw evil in its purest form, saw what happens when humanity is stripped away, when people are reduced to numbers, when death becomes routine. They saved who they could. It was not many. Most died despite everything. But the ones who survived, survived because of those nurses, because Dorothy Still held a sick child, because Pat Lynch cleaned infected feet, because Robert Hilliard refused to look away. Dorothy Still died in 1989. Her daughter never learned what her mother saw, what she carried, what she survived. Some stories die with the people who lived them, because mercy does not require recognition. When you are faced with suffering, you either help or you walk away. These women did not walk away. February 14th, 1946. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. University of Pennsylvania. Betty Jean Jennings stood in the back of the room, watching. The demonstration hall was packed. Reporters, photographers, military brass, university officials. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and machine oil. Everyone wanted to see ENIAC, the electronic numerical integrator and computer, the first programmable electronic computer in history. 30 tons of metal filling an entire room. The machine that could calculate in 30 seconds what took humans 40 hours. The engineers stood at the front, smiling, answering questions, flashbulbs popping, explaining how brilliant they were, how they built this revolutionary machine, how they changed computing forever. Betty stood in the back with the other 5 women, Kay McNulty, Marlin Westcoff, Ruth Lichterman, Frances Billis, Betty Holberton, the 6 women who programmed ENIAC, who made it work, who spent 6 months figuring out how to translate mathematics into electrical pulses, who debugged thousands of connections, who created the first computer programs in history. Betty's hands were cold. She pressed them against her skirt, watched the reporters scribble notes. Not a single one looked at the women. Not a single one asked their names. A photographer walked past, raised his camera, aimed at the engineers standing beside ENIAC's control panel, clicked, moved on, never looked at the women, never asked what they did, never wondered how the machine actually worked, just photographed the hardware, the metal, the men. Kay leaned over, whispered close to Betty's ear, "They do not even know we exist." Betty nodded, her throat tight, watched a reporter from the New York Times interview one of the hardware engineers, watched him explain programming without mentioning the women who invented it, watched him take credit for 6 months of their work, watched history being written wrong in real time. "This is not right," Kay said. "No." Betty's voice was quiet. "But it is how it works." After the demonstration, after the reporters left, after the engineers went to celebrate, an army officer approached Betty, middle-aged, clean uniform, polite smile. He thanked her for her service, said the army appreciated her contribution during the war, said her work had been valuable. Then he said they would not be needing programmers anymore. The engineers could handle programming from here. She was being let go, effective immediately. "What about my work?" Betty kept her voice level. "Professional. I programmed ENIAC. I made it operational. I trained the engineers. I created all the documentation." The officer's smile did not change. "And we appreciate that, Miss Jennings. But programming is really just secretarial work. Detailed, yes, but not scientific. The real innovation is the hardware, the engineering. We need engineers now, not computers. I am not a computer. I am a programmer." The officer's smile faded. "You are discharged, Miss Jennings. You can collect your final pay from personnel. Good luck in your future endeavors." He walked away. Betty stood in the empty hall. The ENIAC hummed behind her. 30 tons of metal and wire. Useless without programming. Useless without the work she did. But the men who built the metal would be remembered. The women who made it think would be forgotten. She walked to her desk, started packing. Kay was already there, sitting, staring at nothing, her eyes red. "What will you do?" Kay asked. "I do not know." Betty pulled notebooks from her drawer. 6 months of work, calculations, debugging notes, programming sequences. Find work somewhere. Maybe get married. Forget I ever did this. Will you forget? Betty looked at the ENIAC, at the machine she programmed, at the accumulator panels she wired, at the function tables she configured, at the revolution she helped create that would erase her name before the ink dried on today's newspapers. No, I will not forget, but everyone else will. She picked up her box, walked out, did not look back. September 1945, Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Private Mary Heaney signed her discharge papers. The pen felt heavy. 3 years in the Women's Army Corps. 3 years operating switchboards for Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. 3 years handling classified communications that helped coordinate D-Day. 3 years working 16-hour shifts while V-1 rockets fell on London. The discharge officer handed her a check. $200, severance pay. That was it. No veterans' benefits, no GI Bill, no college tuition assistance, no housing loans, no medical care. Mary stared at the check. What about the GI Bill? The officer did not look up from his paperwork. That is for servicemen. You were Women's Army Corps, auxiliary, not active duty military. I worked for Chef. I handled classified D-Day communications. I was stationed in Normandy under fire. You were auxiliary personnel, the officer repeated, his voice flat. Bored, not eligible for veterans' benefits. The regulations are clear. Mary folded the check, put it in her purse. $200 for 3 years of service, for risking her life, for doing work that men received medals and college degrees for. $200 and a handshake. That was all. She walked outside into September sunshine, saw other women getting discharged, some crying, some angry, most just silent, accepting, understanding that this was how it worked. You serve, you sacrifice, you prove yourself, and then you go home, and everyone forgets you were ever in uniform. A younger whack approached, barely 20, fresh face, still believed in fairness, asked Mary what she would do now. Go home to Ohio, find a job, probably secretarial work. Was it worth it? The young woman's voice was earnest, hopeful, joining, serving. Mary thought about her brother Joe, the one with the heart condition, the reason she enlisted. She had served for him, had worn the uniform he wanted to wear, had done the job he could not do. He wrote her every week, said he was proud, said she was a real soldier. Yes, it was worth it. Mary meant it. Even if no one remembers, even if it does not count, we know what we did. That has to be enough. The young woman nodded, walked away. Mary stood alone in the Iowa sunshine, holding her discharge papers, holding $200, holding 3 years of service that officially never counted, would not appear on any veteran registry, would not qualify her for any benefit, would not be acknowledged by anyone except the women who served beside her. She got on the bus, went home, never talked about the war, never mentioned the switchboards, never told anyone she handled communications that helped win D-Day, just went back to being invisible, just like they wanted. October 1945, Columbia University, New York. Chien-Shung Wu sat in a faculty meeting, the only woman in a room of 12 physicists. The conference room was cold. She had forgotten her sweater, listened to men discuss research priorities, listened to them assign projects, listened to them decide who would work on what important problems. The department chair looked at her. "Dr. Wu, we would like you to take over supervision of the undergraduate physics laboratories, teaching, helping students, important pedagogical work." Chien-Shung kept her hands folded on the table. "I have a doctorate from Berkeley. I worked on the Manhattan Project. I solved critical problems in uranium isotope separation and reactor poisoning. I am a research physicist, not a teaching assistant." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. The department chair cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses. Dr. Wu, teaching is essential work. Someone needs to supervise the labs, then hire someone for that position. I will be conducting independent research. Women do not typically conduct independent research in this department. The chair's voice was patient, condescending, like explaining something to a child. Research requires tremendous focus, dedication, long hours. Surely you understand the challenges. I understand perfectly. Qianxiong stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I understand you want to sideline me. Keep me away from real work. Keep me in a teaching lab where I cannot compete with you. I helped build the atomic bomb. I changed physics. And you want me to supervise undergraduates mixing chemicals. Dr. Wu, please sit down. No. She picked up her notebook. I will be in my laboratory, designing experiments, conducting research, publishing papers, with or without your permission. She walked out. The door closed behind her with a solid click. In the hallway, her hands were shaking. She pressed them against the wall, took a breath. That night she sat in her apartment, could not sleep, kept thinking about Hiroshima, the mushroom cloud she watched rise from that hill in New Mexico. 70,000 dead. Her calculations made that possible. Her work, her brilliance. And now they wanted to put her in a teaching lab, like none of it mattered, like she was not good enough, like being brilliant meant nothing if you were a woman. Her husband, Luke, found her sitting in the dark at 2 a.m., asked if she was all right. No, I am not all right. I killed thousands of people with my physics, and now they want me to teach undergraduates, like I am not capable of real work, like everything I did was temporary, like I should be grateful they let me in the building at all. Luke sat beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. You are better than all of them. Prove it. Do the research they say you cannot do. Publish the papers they say women cannot write. Win the prizes they say are only for men. How many times do I have to prove it? Her voice broke. How many times before it is enough? As many times as it takes. Luke pulled her closer, until they run out of excuses, until they cannot deny you anymore. Qianxiong went back to work the next day, started researching beta decay, started designing the experiments that would eventually disprove parity conservation, started proving herself, again, 12 years of proving herself later. Qianxiong stood in her laboratory at Columbia, looking at data. The experiment worked. Parity was violated in weak interactions. Physical systems and their mirror images did not behave identically. Everything physics had assumed for decades was wrong. She had proven it. She called Tsung-Dao Lee, told him. He was ecstatic, said this would win the Nobel Prize, said her experimental work proved everything, said she would finally receive the recognition she deserved. October 1957. The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Tsung-Dao Lee and Chen-Ning Yang for their theoretical work on parity violation. Qianxiong Wu, who designed and conducted the experiment that proved their theory correct, was not mentioned, not nominated, not considered, not acknowledged. She found out from a colleague. He came to her laboratory, looked uncomfortable, said he was sorry, said it was unjust, said she deserved the prize more than anyone. Qianxiong did not cry, did not shout, did not break anything, just nodded, said thank you, went back to work. That night, alone in her apartment, she allowed herself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to feel the injustice, the anger, the exhaustion of proving herself over and over and still being denied. Then she dried her eyes, went back to her desk, started designing the next experiment. She would keep working, keep researching, keep proving herself, for 40 more years, until she died in 1997, at age 84, without the one recognition that mattered most, but with a legacy that changed physics forever, whether the Nobel Committee acknowledged it or not. New York City, 50 years after the war. Betty Jean Jennings sat in her small apartment, 72 years old, retired, watching television. A documentary about the history of computers, about ENIAC, about the birth of modern computing. The documentary showed the engineers, the men who built the hardware, showed them explaining how revolutionary ENIAC was, how they changed the world, how they invented computing, how brilliant they were. Betty waited for her name, for any mention of the 6 women, for acknowledgement that programming existed, that someone made the hardware think, that women made ENIAC work. The documentary ended, credits rolled. The engineers received full credit. The women did not exist. 50 years later, still erased. Betty's granddaughter was visiting, saw tears on Betty's face, came over, sat beside her, asked what was wrong. I programmed that machine. Betty's voice was quiet. Me and 5 other women. We made it work. We invented programming. And no one knows. No one remembers. 50 years, and we are still invisible. The granddaughter hugged her. I know, Grandma. I will remember. I will tell people your story. Betty shook her head. It is too late. History is already written. We are already forgotten. Nothing changes that. But Betty was wrong. History was not finished. Researchers found the ENIAC women, interviewed them, recorded their stories, finally discovered the truth, that 6 women invented computer programming, that they had been systematically erased, that history had been written wrong. Betty Jean Jennings finally received recognition. At 74 years old, 51 years after ENIAC, she was inducted into the Women in Technology International Hall of Fame, given awards, given acknowledgement, given credit. A young reporter asked how she felt after 51 years of invisibility, after decades watching men take credit for her work, after a lifetime of erasure. Betty smiled, tired, relieved, sad. I am glad people know now, glad the truth is out. But she paused. It does not change anything that mattered. The decades I spent invisible, the opportunities I lost because no one knew what I did, the credit stolen, the history written wrong. Nothing gives that back. Nothing makes me 23 again with a future ahead of me. She died in 2011, 88 years old, finally recognized, finally remembered, but 51 years too late to matter. Present day, the legacy remains. Computers exist because Betty Jean Jennings figured out how to program them. Modern physics exists because Chen-Shung Wu proved parity violation. Wi-Fi exists because Hedy Lamarr invented frequency hopping. Lives were saved because nurses refused to look away at Bergen-Belsen. The war was won because women refused to stay home. More than 350,000 American women served during World War II. Most died without recognition, without acknowledgement, without anyone knowing their names. But their work changed everything. Betty Jean Jennings stood in the back of that room in 1946, watched reporters photograph engineers, watched men take credit for her work, knew she was being erased, knew no one would remember. She was right. For 51 years, no one did. But she programmed ENIAC anyway, changed computing anyway, invented the future anyway, because the work mattered more than recognition. That was their war. The war after the war. The battle to be remembered, to be acknowledged, to be seen. Most lost that battle, died invisible, forgotten, erased. But what they built remained. The computers, the physics, the technology, the world they changed. Even when no one remembered who changed it in 1946, she programs the first computer. Reporters ignore her. They photograph the men. 1995. She watches a documentary about the inventors of computing. Her name isn't mentioned. 2011. She dies. Finally recognized. 51 years too late. She made the future. Yet history almost forgot her. Comment one word. Betty. Share her story. Make sure the world remembers.